Everyone, thanks very much for joining us electronically. We might have a few bumps in the road as we get through this evening, as it's more of a trial and run for this evening, but we'll certainly get through it. So I have a motion moved by Stephanie Jaworski, second by Martin Lang. Be resolved that the council meeting of the Township of South Glengarry now be opened at 7:02 p.m. All in favor of the motion? I don't see one. Okay, the motion's carried, but I can't, there he comes. Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, with regret, we recently heard the passing of one of our former councillors, Mr. Bill McKenzie. So I'd ask all council members and staff to for 1 minute of silence, if you would, please. Okay, thank you very much. I would ask staff to also lower the Canadian flag at the Township office effective tomorrow for 1 week out of respect for Mr. McKenzie, if you would, please. Okay, I would ask everyone stand for our national anthem. I will have Kaylin play the national anthem instead of singing it this evening. Okay, thank you. I have a motion moved by Lyle Warden, second by Sam McDonnell. Be resolved that the Council of the Township of South Glengarry approve the agenda. Is there any additions to the agenda, Madam Clerk?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Item 1 under for information only, corporate services impact of COVID. We would like to see that moved to other business as item 1, please.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Any other additions from members of council or staff at this time? Nothing. Okay, so it'll be as amended. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Any declaration of pecuniary interest? Deputy Mayor Warden?
No, thank you. Yes, I declared conflict of interest on staff report. I believe it's 20-45 Warden site plan control. Caitlin has my signed form with her.
Yeah, I have it in front of me. Thank you. Any other declaration of pecuniary interest? Not hearing none. I have a motion moved by Martin Lang, second by Lyle Warden. Be resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of the Council of the Township of South Glengarry held on March 16, 2020 be adopted as circulated. Heard the motion. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. I have a motion moved by Sam McDonnell, second by Stephanie Jaworski. Be resolved that the minutes of the special meeting of the Council of the Township of South Glengarry held on March 15, 2020 be adopted as circulated. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Okay, we have no presentations or delegations this evening, so we'll move right into new business. Staff reports, public work facility location study, peer review. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a little bit of historical background to this project. The project has, right from its infancy, been tied to the fire hall project. The Williamstown Fire Hall has reached the end of its useful service life, and we had considered options for replacing that hall, and one of the options that came forward was that we could renovate the existing Williamstown Public Works facility to serve as a fire hall for that community. And of course, that would require the construction of a new public works facility. In 2017, we did complete a construction project on Airport Road for the winter material facility that was built there. And reports leading up to that construction had indicated that this might be a potential site for a future public works facility should the need arise at some point in the future. The project was reviewed by EVB Engineering in 2018. There was somewhat of a limited scope in that review, but the entire report is in your package, as well as the presentation that EVB provided to Council in August of 2018, wherein they reviewed the options that they had looked at. The options were twofold. First option was a central municipal public works facility to service the entire Township of South Glengarry. The second option was to continue operating two facilities, and there were three subsets to that option. One was to maintain the existing Williamstown facility, the do nothing option. The second was to construct a new facility in a west central location, and the third would be to construct a new facility on Airport Road where the existing facility was as of that time. There's been a fair bit of discussion on this project and its location. So what we did do was we reached out to our colleagues at the United Counties of SD&G, and just for everybody's knowledge, the county engineer, Mr. Ben DeHaan, is with us this evening, should there be any specific questions that you might wish to direct to him. But Mr. DeHaan and the operations manager of the counties reviewed the EVB report, and at the end of their review, they came up to the same conclusions, but they also did offer some additional recommendations for future consideration, such as consideration to deploy the entire winter force from the Airport Road site, but only at such time as when the North Lancaster facility has reached the end of its useful life. At that time as well, we would look at a road optimization if that was something we wanted to consider at that time. Road optimization in the EVB report was not one of the major items in that scope. We were entirely looking at this from the optimum location. That being said, the routes were considered. They are appended in the full report for your review, and we have been reviewing those routes over the period of time, over the last number of years, in fact. We typically, on an annual basis, seek input from the operators themselves and from the management team in the roads department to see if there's any efficiencies. And typically the operators are the ones that are out in the field, and they know where they feel that there's improvements that can be made. So the design is in the works for a new facility. We do not yet have a location approved by council. Both the EVB report, administration's recommendations, and the review from the counties have all concluded that the Airport Road site is the preferable site. One of the key considerations, of course, in that recommendation is that is where we have our winter material facility. And that obviously provides a great deal of efficiency if we have the plows and the fleet in the same location as a winter facility. So the report is asking council to approve the airport road site for the development of a new public works facility. That design then would be finalized and brought forward to council for their review and discussion. And hopefully we would be able to bring this forward as a project to tender in 2020. Of course, with all of the issues around COVID-19, that would be conditional on what's happening with the construction work in that we might not be able to move forward. But we do feel that we still want to continue with the design, with the selection of the locations, so that we are able to proceed with the project when we are able to. And Mr. Mayor, I'm open to any questions at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McDonald. I have a motion to read. I'll read the motion and I'll open it up to comments or questions to members of council. I have a motion moved by Martin Lang, second by Stephanie Dworsky. Be it resolved that staff report 43-2020 be received and that the council directs administration to proceed with issuing the tender for a new public works facility to be located on Airport Road where the current winter material facility is located. So you heard the motion. I'll ask if there's any questions. First question would be from Deputy Mayor Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, council members. I have a few questions and comments here. I was on the phone with a number of you for a good period of time. At the end of the day, I would like to see us end up at one shop for all of our plows and all of our maintenance equipment. I feel with today's technology, you know, I think that's possible. A couple of the questions that I have, Johan, I guess would be with the county offering us to be able to fill the salt, fill the trucks mid-route. Why would we wait till North Lancaster was past its best before date? Why wouldn't we consider building a shop on Airport Road at this time to house all of our fleet? And why would we wait to do the route optimization?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, and maybe Mr. DeHaan might want to jump in on this as well, but I'll respond, and then we'll see if there's any further comments. The counties and the townships in SDNG work extremely close together. We have a very cooperative and collaborative working arrangement. So we do the sharing of facilities and materials and joint tenders. So I hear what you're saying as far as the ability to store and have material in Green Valley. In fact, we have done that in the past. The issue with the North Lancaster site is that it is still an asset that has a considerable amount of value at this point. And unfortunately, stranded assets of that significance in the asset value, if we were to close North Lancaster's facility and move the entire operations to Airport Road, we would have a stranded asset. And I think it might have even, I believe this was noted in the SDG report that it might be difficult to divest ourselves of that asset. The other question you had is whether the Airport Road site can accommodate the entire deployment of the operations. And yes, it can for the summer operations. It would be a little tight for winter operations at this present time. However, that site does have sufficient capacity to expand the garage with another 2 bays or 3 bays or 4 bays, whatever would be required at some point in the future. The current draft design, and again, we haven't finalized this for tender purposes, but the current draft design is a 5-bay drive-through garage that would allow for 10 units to be parked, which is essentially the 10 plow routes that we have. So we could house everything in-house with the current design that we're working on with the 5-bay drive-through design. So the reason why we wouldn't go to that at this point in time is because we do have the asset value in North Lancaster, and I believe we would want to consider running the deployment from North Lancaster and the Airport Road site. I'm not convinced that one site is the answer based on the deployment and based on our rural nature. I think that we address the winter service levels out of North Lancaster very well deploying out of that facility. We do not have a whole lot of time that the plows are driving on any road with the plow up, which is inefficient. So if we were deploying everything out of Airport Road, that would have to be something we'd have to consider would be how long would it take the plows to get to the point where they would actually start doing their operations. So at this point, it's something for future consideration, but certainly if council wished to advance that, we'd have to look at it more seriously.
Subsequent, Mr. Mayor? Thank you. So I guess I would like to see us move forward with a route optimization as soon as possible. I think we have funding available to do that. That wouldn't cost us any money out of our pocket. I know we've been dipping into the modernization fund that province has allotted us. But another issue that, Johan, that I really am concerned is when we decide with the design, I want to make sure that we're not limiting ourselves to the possibility of future expansion at the new garage if it gets passed. And I also maybe Ben could explain, like one of that in that report. It's stated that it's beneficial for the plows not to have salt in them, and then the county makes a comment that they feel that that's not an issue. I personally myself feel that at the end of the day, much like we put our fire trucks away, that the trucks should be put away ready for the next storm per se, and be ready to be deployed. Because I think when the roads manager calls our drivers in, they should get to the shop if it's being called in, get in their trucks, do their circle check, and then be on their way. I don't like the idea that they have to fill the truck up with salt. So maybe Ben can jump in here, and maybe, or however you want to handle that, Johan.
Yeah, maybe Ben and I did have some discussion/debate on this issue, so I'll allow Ben to bring forward his thoughts. If that's okay with you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Don.
Thank you. Yes, we did have that discussion, and I know our operations plan, we do not have our trucks loaded. The trucks get loaded as we deploy out to respond to a winter event. That said, if we know, if we're going in between shifts, or we know that something's coming at the start of a shift, we will occasionally have our trucks loaded. Our opinion is that it's not detrimental in terms of having the trucks loaded. And this is from our mechanic. I want to stress I'm not a mechanic, but from our mechanic, it was, he's indicated very clearly, no, it's not harmful or detrimental to the suspension or whatnot of that plow equipment, but to have salt sitting in it for any significant length of time does impact the longevity of the plow, just being the corrosion that you get from that. So, the way, and oftentimes too with winter operations, we have the technology nowadays to be ready for most winter storms that come in. So quite often, we're ahead of the storm. We're getting out there well before there's significant accumulation or significant ice buildup on the roadways. So that lag time of loading up is not an issue for us. And backing up a little bit, when we built our salt storage facilities, particularly Green Valley and St. Andrews, we did size them larger than what we needed at the county to allow for some additional volume. So that is there, and that's available to local municipalities to use as they need.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that information.
Any other comments or questions, Deputy Mayor Warden?
No, I'm good. I think I know there's others that want to jump in, I'm sure. So I'm good. Thank you very much for that information.
Okay, thank you. I just want a question for Johan, if I can. Johan, you mentioned something earlier that we don't have the final designs, but Is that going to come back to council for approval, I guess, or as an opportunity that we can have an opportunity to look at it before it goes out to tender?
Yeah, thank you. The design would be draft finalized. We do have, I think, what we're very close to from an operational standpoint, but before we go to tender, I would bring that back to council to provide them an opportunity to review it, provide comments, and if there's some final revisions, we can look at doing that at that time.
Okay, I think council would appreciate that, seeing it before it goes out to tender. So thanks for that. Any other questions or comments from members of council? Councillor Lang, and then Councillor Jaworski.
Who's trying to speak, Lang?
Martin, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. I couldn't unmute myself. Instead, I had to wait for the moderator to unmute my phone, my video. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald, for the presentation, and thank you, Ben, also for reviewing it for us. I think it's time to put this issue to bed. I would like to, I'm going to definitely vote in favor of going ahead with the location. I would as well like to see the design as soon as possible. I know the province has put everything on hold, and we all have put our lives on hold because of COVID-19. But if, and hopefully, you know, we don't know how long this is going to last, but if we get things up and running in the next month or so, I would like to see us doing our part. We have this money set aside already. If we can put this money out there, get some construction started in our area, instead of sitting on this money for another year, I would love to see this thing get up and get going. And maybe that won't happen this summer. Maybe we'll be shut down for the summer. But let's get it ready to go. Let's get the design to us. Let's see it and get it out to tender. And then when the time comes that we can get going, let's get this community back rolling again. So we've been talking about this for a couple of years now, and I'd like to see it get going. Well, that's my opinion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lang. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a question. It'll be for Mr. DeHaan, but I guess the focus of my thinking on this project is really like, how can we be most efficient with the taxpayer dollars? And that may be all in one location, that may be in two locations. And in my mind, that's really not sorted out until we've done route optimization, because the cost of a plow is fairly significant. The annual cost of operating a plow is also very significant. So if our plan means we're adding a plow, or perhaps if it means that we're effectively have an extra plow in the system, those could all be things that really should factor in to the financial discussion here. So my question to Mr. DeHaan is, as I was reading your report, and sort of the ending to me kind of read as though you were suggesting we should do the plow optimization before we finalize on somewhat location, but mostly in terms of size. So I'd like this, if you could say if that's a fair characterization of your opinion.
I would suggest where I was going with this report is that the best thing to do is, number one, do an optimization just based on relocating Williamstown to this location. As you're working through that, at the same time, work through what does it look like if everything is coming from that facility. The nice thing whenever you're building a public works facility is when it's bays like that, it's often, and we've done it through our history at the counties, adding an extra bay on and adding an extra bay on is a lot easier to do. And that's why you don't want to sell yourself short or limit yourself with where you're putting that building, so that you have that opportunity to do that. Now, from what I understand, speaking with Johan after we had looked at the report, is that the design right now actually accommodates everything to be in there right away. So I guess what I'm saying is, you read that correctly. We're suggesting do that optimization study, whether it's in-house or you're bringing in outside experts. Do that optimization study and actually both scenarios kind of right from the outset, so you have a good understanding what the impact is to existing routes if you're just moving Williamstown, and what the feasibility is of moving everything there. And then from there, it helps to make that determination whenever you haven't limited yourself to be able to move North Lancaster into that facility. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. So I will, if I can, Mr. Mayor, I'll have a supplemental. So so no, that does help significantly. So, you know, with that in mind, I'm very much on the same page as our deputy mayor, where I would like to do a route optimization before, you know, before we go further on in this process to see, do we want everything there or just what is at Williamstown at that location? One thing, my second question to you, Mr. Dahan, is one of the constraints in the EVB report was that we were looking at township-owned lands. And so that sort of was driving us to Airport Road. So I was wondering, from your perspective and seeing what you've seen in the report, do you think there's value in sort of looking at it more from a blank slate approach, in the sense of, if we don't, you know, we don't put that kind of constraint and we look at it, where would be the, if we could start from the beginning, where would be the ideal location to place one facility for the entire township? Do you think there would be value in that exercise?
Quite honestly, no. If I'm being frank with you, I think you've made, you know, you've made an investment in a salt storage facility that's in new shape at Airport Road. So in our view, in my view, as we looked at it, no, it didn't make sense to actually expand that out, but rather, you know, you've made some significant investment there. You've got a facility that's sized for the municipality. If that was in poor shape, perhaps it makes sense to look then, but the fact that you've got a good facility there, that's got the space, and that you're in a location that is not disruptive to neighbors, it's relatively closely located to some pretty significant transportation corridors to be able to deploy yourselves, you're in a reasonable spot. If you step back and look at how the county operates, you know, we serve 6 local municipalities, but we do it with 4 shops. So, you know, we do have to travel quite a distance, and it is a different kind of deployment that we look at because we're doing arterial roadways. So a little bit different, but I guess my point being is that the fact that you're so close to some good transportation networks, you can deploy from there relatively easy. I'm not convinced that an extensive property search is going to get you much further, and it strikes me as that's a pretty good location for the municipality.
Thank you very much for that. And so based on that answer, you know, sort of reinforces, I think it's important to do a route optimization to ensure that if we're going to build a facility, and if we decide that it's most efficient, i.e. saving the most money for our taxpayers, to have it all in one location, I think we should do that before we build the facility and before we finalize on the design for the facility, to ensure that, you know, it will accommodate. Because again, if we end up moving everything to Airport Road, and that means we have another truck, well, now we're not talking about our 10 plow routes anymore. We're talking about 11, and they're not going to fit. So I think that's an important activity to do beforehand.
Okay, thank you. I believe there's a comment or a question from our CEO, and then I'll move to Councillor McDonnell, and I'll get a comment from Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So there have been a number of points brought up about route optimization. We have spoken about this I have spoken about it with Mr. McDonald and other managers. And my suggestion here is that I talk to Mr. McDonald and Mr. Dahan about securing someone to do route optimization. I know that Mr. McDonald was looking into that. That also brings me to another point about that Deputy Mayor Warden's brought up about modernization funding. We need to look at it to make some other decisions with some of that funding, I think, and to move forward. And I'll work with staff to bring that back to the next meeting related to the modernization funding, but also specific to this with the route optimization. So in 2 weeks, okay?
Okay, thanks very much for the update. I'll move to Councillor McDonnell, and then if Mr. McDonald has any questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Route optimization done. I'm fairly confident if we do, per the county's suggestion, go to one municipal garage in the future, I believe we will have to add at least one plow because it's a long ways to Lancaster Heights from Somerstown. One question for Mr. McDonald: are we allowed to run our plows down the 401 there's no loss or issue there.
Can you repeat that, Councillor McDonnell? You got.
I think I understood the question, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, go ahead.
I believe the question, Mr. Councillor McDonnell, was can we run our plows down the 401? And the answer to that is yes, ARCVO are licensed. We can use that corridor to get to our deployment areas. Just a couple of points of clarification. No, unless Councillor McDonnell has a supplemental.
Thank you, Kaylin. I would like to, I guess, just kind of comment that I am not 100% comfortable with the location. I would much rather see it a little more central. I know we have a lot of money invested in Airport Road, and I understand that. I just view this as a long-term facility, and I think there were other options that maybe should have been explored at this point. But I can see I am outvoted here, so I will concede to that. But personally, I did feel there was a better location, but I won't hold up council on that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, just a couple of points of clarification. The initial study by EVB did not exclude the review of potential sites that weren't on township-owned lands. That was option one. However, given the circumstances with the Airport Road site and that the township had a vested interest in that land, that was one of the reasons why it was reviewed in part of option two. So that was what led us to that conclusion. The other aspect, as Mr. DeHaan has expressed, is that with public works facilities, they are typically of a design that does allow for a fairly easy expansion to another bay or two or three or four bays, whatever might be required in the past. So I would be very pleased if council would move forward with the current design that will be brought forward with the site selection, but the current design, and have contingency within that design for future expansion, so that we don't lose too much more time. I'm also of the opinion, and this would be yet to be determined or to prove itself out, but I suspect that there might be a potential to get some pretty decent pricing for a project of this size, given the nature of the circumstances we're in with the COVID pandemic, because I believe contractors will be looking for work to stimulate the economy. And I would very much like to see this project move forward in conjunction with the review of potential future route optimization sooner than later, but waiting till another route optimization study is completed before we start finalizing the design, I believe is going to put us back further than what I was hoping to see. And that's where the recommendation is still to pick to select the Airport Road site, to finalize the draft design, but have it contingent on an ability to expand. And we know we have that with the footprint of the property that we're building on.
Jordan, if I can ask a question before I go back to a couple other council members. Has the land been transferred from the airport commissions to the municipality at this point? Do we own the lands now?
The survey's been completed, Mr. Mayor, but the lands have not yet been transferred. There's still the formal paperwork.
Okay, so we need to get that done as soon as we can. Also, my other question would be is, if we're talking about at some point maybe not operating out of the North Lancaster and whenever that time may be, I'm just wondering if the design today should be based on a full garage instead of adding on and adding on and adding on. I mean, you know, with the issue that we're going through today with COVID-19, the federal government and the provincial government are going to be in a financial pinch over the next number of years, and they may be looking at cutbacks to municipalities. So we may not have that excess funding from those upper tier governments to help us out or provide extra dollars to add on to this garage. So I'm just wondering if now is not the time to do that. And I would prefer, my personal opinion, I would prefer that being done today. If we're looking at that in the future, I mean, even if it's 5 years or 10 years down the way, I'd rather see a larger garage because we're looking at, you know, 50 to 75 years down the road. We're not looking over the next 5 years. But.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we are looking currently at a facility that would house the 10 winter fleet that we currently deploy. But certainly if it was council's wish to see that we have a space now for an additional 3 or 4 plow units should the route optimization be completed and that be determined that be the need, then yeah, I would certainly consider that as part of the design and take that direction.
Well, that would be my personal opinion. I'd rather see it built once instead of going back 2 or 3 times after, because when you build additions, they're not the suitable thing in regards to, you know, the leaks on the roofs and so on and so forth. So I'd rather build it once. I'll go to Deputy Mayor Warden and Councillor McDonnell.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Frank, I 100% concur with your thoughts on let's build it now with the large enough to encompass the whole fleet. The other point that I wanted to make that I didn't like in that report, Johan, was the fact that we're leaving the grader behind. I think that's silly. Personally, I think that if we're building a new garage, all of our roads equipment should be run out of that location, or if we're going to keep North Lancaster, I don't think we need a third location for our road equipment. Once the garage in Williamstown is converted to a fire hall, that should be left specifically for fire services. I don't like that idea of leaving the grader behind, because if the managers in the morning are doing their morning, you know, you all meet at the garage. Well, it's kind of silly. Does that person have to, does the grader operator have to drive to Airport Road and then go to? So I'd like that to be made sure that that garage is encompassing that as well. And I also concur with Councillor Lang's comment that we as a municipality have a duty to the local economy, and we do have this money. It's not found money. It's saved money, and for the purpose of building this this new facility. And I think now's the time to get it out there so that once construction is permitted again for commercial uses, that we can get people working in our community. Thank you.
I agree with that also. So Mr. McDonald, if you could take into consideration in regards to the grader at some point, please. Thank you.
Certainly will. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
I concur, and that certainly would take that into consideration. And as Deputy Mayor Warden said, deployment from the one location would be the most effective and efficient.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would agree that if we are going to build this and we are going to go in one spot, then do it right and do it now, and not have the potential for leaks in the roofs and everything else, and that just creates heat loss. There was a comment that was made, are we currently designing this garage as a drive-through garage?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I hesitate on that just for the sole reason that, I mean, adding extra doors is just extra heat loss. I do have an issue that, thus far I know what it costs to heat a shop, and I know our doors are a major heat loss right now. That would be one of my concerns, as well as you make the comment that we might get a better pricing due to COVID-19 and with what's going on, but I would maybe argue that as soon as it's opened up, they're going to have a backlog of projects, and they might be charging us a little bit more to do it. Would it be beneficial, or maybe Mr. DeHaan can answer this, or you and yourself as well? Are we going to save any money maybe putting this out to tender now for a start goes to pushing this, trying to get it done early? But like I say, I don't know. There might be a big push on to get all these projects they've already lined up complete.
I'm not sure who wants to take that, Mr. DeHaan or Mr. McDonald. Mr. DeHaan, go ahead.
I can start, and happy to throw to Johan afterwards. I know the work we're doing now and the work we're tendering right now, we're putting some I would say favorable contractor language in it, so that we have the ability to, like, if there's flexibility in schedule and flexibility of when they can start, and kind of recognition that it's a trying time right now, and that we're going to consider the time we're in. From everything I'm hearing, that's kind of the right approach. And my suggestion would be, if, you know, once you get it to a point where you're ready to go out to tender, just make sure you have those kinds of things in there, particularly if it's not a matter of we're going to be kicked out of this building and our plows are going to be out on the street. Like that's not the case for you. So you've got that ability to be flexible and those kinds of things from what I'm hearing and the information I'm gathering through emails is what contractors are really looking for right now. So that's my opinion. And I don't know, Johan, if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think you've captured the general sense of the construction climate right now. And yeah, because of all the uncertainty, we need to build flexibility into any tenders we issue so that the contractors can have a fair opportunity to look at these projects.
Okay, thank you. I think Councillor McDonnell had or Councillor Lang, sorry, had a question, then Councillor Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. I'm liking what I'm hearing about what you guys are saying about making sure it's sized right now. I think that's a good point. And depending on what happens with the next item on our agenda, there might be some money available to make sure that is done right away. It looks like we might have some savings on the next item. So I think that's a good idea. Nobody's ever built a building and say we built it too big. Every time we always say we should have built a little bit bigger. So let's look at that now. It shouldn't take a long time with this type of construction. You know, if it's what I'm thinking, Mr. McDonald, it's you know, the I-beam type construction. They're fairly easy to add on to. So let's have a look at that now. As far as the grader staying in Williamstown or something, Lyle makes a very, very good point. Let's keep our guys, you know, so they don't have to go to one building or two. At least let's not make it 3 for the grader. And I think right now, I think we have 10 plows, but we also have the grader and the backhoe. So 5 bays, we're going to put 2 per bay. I think would only get us the 10 plows. The grader and the backhoe wouldn't fit. So I think we'd be still short 2 if my numbers are right. So I'd say we add 4 onto it. That gives us room for the grader and plow and an extra bay, which would hold 2 vehicles for future expansion if we decide that that's where we want to go. As far as what Councillor McDonnell was saying there, I think the double bays are a good idea if you're putting 2 vehicles in them, because it's the same number of overhead doors. So the drive-through with 2 vehicles in each one, if you've got the same number of doors, but you're shortening your building, you're not making your building a mile long in order to get 12 or 14 bays. You only need 6 or 7 bays, and you know, same number of overhead doors. It should be cheaper to go with a little wider and shorter building rather than making a building that's, you know, 600 feet long. That's my thing for now. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with that also. I think the double doors make more sense, but Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you. Just a quick, I have a quick comment, but if I could just ask a quick follow-up on that, the issue of the double doors. In Williamstown currently now, is it a drive-through design or is it a, no, it's not drive-through?
No, it's not.
Back in.
So one will back in and then there's another one in front? Okay,
There's
so
a wall. There's a wall.
There's a wall between the two, the south and the north parts of that garage. There's a wall there, so there's a separation. There was an older part and a newer part.
Okay.
Were built onto it, so that's why it's separated.
I mean, I can understand the appeal of it, the drive-through, because it's quick. But I mean, again, and these are things that to me, again, like trying to look at the efficiency, being cost efficient with these buildings. I think that's something that we need to, like, it's nice and convenient to be able to drive through, but if it doubles our heating costs, then, you know, and we're not entirely clear what the operating cost for this site will be, considering it's not going to be on natural gas like the other 2 sites that are, and like their operating costs are fairly low. These are all financials that I feel like should have been sort of part of this overall, you know, the overall picture. But back to the point of the size of the building, which is where I want to make my comment, I still think it comes back to doing the route optimization and understanding properly what's the number of vehicles we would have if we have them all in one location, considering that we may or may not be adding a vehicle by locating all in one location. And now we've already named 2 other pieces of equipment that weren't in the original size that we want to add in. I think, you know, again, and also we've typically under budgeted when it comes to these projects. So, you know, it's easy to say here, oh, we're going to add this and we're going to add that. If now we're adding, you know, if we end up under budget, if we've ended up under budgeting and now we're adding $400,000 for additional size to the building, at some point, I think we need to stop and say, well, perhaps we should keep operating with North Lancaster. But again, I don't think we have those numbers to be able to make that proper comparison. So my preference is that we do route optimization before we put this to tender.
Okay, I think we've heard everybody's comments. We've been dealing with it for probably 3 to 4 years now, I guess, for this council and the previous council. So I think everybody's gave their opinion and their comments. So I am going to ask for a vote. So the vote is basically to proceed with the tender. And I guess, Mr. McDonald, the tender would be in respect to, I believe, it's the larger building versus a smaller building. And it's also to be located at Airport Road. So if everybody's in favor, can I have a show of hands, please? And opposed? And the motion is carried.
Mr. Mayor, can I just jump in for one last brief comment?
Yeah.
I just want to thank our colleagues at the counties, Mr. DeHaan and Mr. Baker, for their assistance on this review, and they've given generously of their time. I have yet to receive an invoice, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but their expertise and knowledge to assist us through this has been very valuable and appreciated, and thank you to them. I
presume Mr. DeHaan realizes we're under budget now, so I don't know if we see one of those and have a conversation with him.
Yeah, I'm extremely jealous you're building a new public works facility. It's very exciting. So
well, don't bring one to the county level, sir.
I need 4.
But Ben, thanks for being with us this evening, and I'll be watching for you to make sure you're on to the rest of the council meeting.
Oh, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next item is the William Street reconstruction tender. Mr. McDonald again, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is, I guess, a ray of sunshine in what are pretty gloomy days. And we had the tender for the William Street reconstruction in Williamstown. And it's a full reconstruction, including storm sewers, storm scepters for the treatment of wastewater, stormwater runoff, and sidewalk. And the tenders were issued and closed with a low bid from Malian Excavation Inc. at $974,347, which was significantly lower than the engineer's estimate. In fact, about $340,000 lower than the most recent estimate we had from the engineers. The award is recommended by administration to Malian. The budget is 1.2, so there is some surplus funding. I will be looking at the full capital program now that we have pretty much all of our pricing in, and coming back to council within the next month to update on where there might be surplus funding and how we could reallocate that. The contract for this William Street reconstruction obviously will have to be written also to have respect and consider the COVID-19 pandemic situation we're in. So we'll need to build in some flexibility there on the contract. But given the very competitive pricing, it is administration's recommendation and supported by our consultant that we award this project as per their submission.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have no issue giving it to Malian. I think their submission looks pretty good. I have full confidence they're going to do a good job. I did have one suggestion as to what we should be doing with the surplus now after Councillor Lang made the comment that we put it towards the garage, because I think we will need it there. But we do have one road in the municipality that is severely it desperately needs a facelift, which would be the south end of Chapel Road from 18 to just north of Beaverbrook. In that section, it's treacherous. It'll bounce your teeth out of your face in the seat. So that was one of my concerns, that I thought maybe this excess surplus could go there, but I do see that by the looks of it, our township garage is going to run a little over budget after this evening, so we will probably be putting it there. But I would put that to Mr. McDonald if we do have something else coming up, or it would be a good spot to do some work this year.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald.
At this point, I wouldn't want to comment on what specific projects we'd want to allocate funding to. I think we'd have to go back to our asset management plan, take a look at those reports, and determine where the best application of any surplus funds on capital programs would be, and that would be a decision of council. Would be brought back with options for council as far as whether it be a road project or a structure project or a facility project or something similar to the municipal garage. So again, those numbers would have to be developed as far as what the surpluses might be, and then options for reallocation of those fundings should council choose to move forward with other projects.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to Councillor Jaworski and then Deputy Mayor Warden.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. I have two questions. My first question is, for this particular stretch of road, am I correct in that there's already natural gas and fiber optic for that, along that road?
I believe there's natural gas. I'm not absolutely sure of fiber optics. I believe the answer to that is yes, because the fiber optic system did go through the village of Williamstown a few years ago, but it looks like maybe Councillor McDonnell can confirm that.
You see, yeah, I see him nodding yes, but I think I'm just hoping this becomes like a regular part of every time we do road projects, is that, those are things that we check off the box, that we do have, if there's an opportunity, we're digging it out in natural gas and fiber optic. So. Yeah.
Normally when we do a design, we reach out to all of the utilities and advise them. In this case, for example, we've reached out to Hydro because there's some poles there that are fairly old, and we've met with Hydro to look at those and request that they look at replacing them as part of the project. So we're working through that at this moment.
Okay. And my second question with regards to COVID-19 and the delay. So I understand that industrial commercial construction is currently on pause, but what falls under like essential infrastructure? Because my understanding is essential infrastructure can keep going, but what falls under that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that's a wonderful question, and critical infrastructure is the wording that's used in the essential services list for construction. And in this case, because we have a road with a storm sewer system that is failing, we don't know what the quality is of the stormwater runoff that's going directly into the Raisin River. We know that the road itself has gone beyond the point where we can do a rehabilitation. It's going to require full reconstruction. There isn't a definition of critical from the province, but I would suggest that this would fit into that category, and that we would be able to proceed with this project under the current restrictions for essential services.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to Deputy Mayor Warden.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I guess my concern, there's quite a bit of money on the table between the first and the second winter, and I just want to make sure that that staff is going to ensure that the job is done properly. The other concern that I have is it's a pretty sensitive area, especially when you get down by Kevin Pelly's or closer to the peanut line. There's quite a bit of a slope there. My concern is that there's going to be some overrun, kind of that the township's going to have to come up with some extra. I am concerned about that area. What do we have for a contingency fund on this project? And I personally would not, I would like to not touch that money till the project is done. Just, because I have a feeling that it's a pretty steep bank on that side up at that end, and be quite concerned to touch that, the surplus till the project's actually finished.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, the pricing is very competitive. It is my understanding that the low bidder has come in very competitive. A couple of large projects in the area that they weren't successful on, that one of the other competitors has picked up. So I believe that they were looking at this project in a very strong manner. There is also a $75,000 contingent built into the project. So obviously that money will not be spent unless there's a need identified and approved through the engineers and through the owner being the municipality. So we do have some contingency funding in there. And I agree that this is a fairly sensitive project. In speaking with the contractor, I do, as Councillor McDonnell stated earlier, I do have full confidence that they have the ability to do the project, but we need to be very much on top of this project.
Oh, yeah,
as they're going through it.
I have a subsequent. Johan, I didn't see the design of this project. Was there any design for shore stabilization? Like, are there going to be some trees planted? Is there going to be something to shore up? Like, I think while we're going through it, maybe something really to consider. But is there any shore stabilization in this design for that area specifically?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there isn't a requirement for shore stabilization, but there is a requirement for a guide rail all along the north side. So it'll push everything a little further to the south on the road allowance with the guide rail. So no shore stabilization was identified in the design or in the geotechnical survey that was done to.
Oh, so there was a geotechnical survey done, because the road tilts pretty. Running down that road with a load of fuel and freezing rain was pretty pretty sketchy at times.
Yeah, no, through you, Mr. Mayor, there was a geotechnical survey done to support the design.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of council? Okay, not hearing none. I have a motion moved by Lyle Warden, second by Sam McDonnell. Be resolved that the Council of the Township of South Glengarry receive staff report 44-2020 and that the tender for reconstruction of William Street be awarded to Malian Excavation Limited as per their submission of $974,347.23 plus HST, and furthermore that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign any relevant documents. You heard the motion. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. We'll move to number 3, a second reading proposed clean yards bylaw. Ms. Brune.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff, as well as any members of the public. This is going to be my second reading for the Clean Yards bylaw. I've indicated on the staff report that a couple of changes were the naturalized area definition. I also added the definition for normal farm practice. I've changed the compost distance from the property line to 0.6 meters as opposed to the previous one of 2 meters, as well as added a definition for the word yard. That you guys don't, members of council don't have a copy of at this time, but it was changed today. I am going to be sharing my PowerPoint as I go through the next decision-making process of the normal farm practice. Bear with me. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So this is all the same as prior. We went through for a first reading, and now with some suggestions, we have changed it. The strategic goals, these are all the same as the first reading. For this one, how the Township of South Glengarry is going to be addressing agricultural uses regarding the 1.5 meter buffer strip. So initially, it was all properties within South Glengarry need to have the 1.5 meter buffer strip if it's a naturalized area. This was including farms lands or agricultural purposes lands. The first option after our initial council meeting was we could change it to address, farmlands abutting residential zones, but that it came with way too many exceptions. Then there was option 2, we can completely exclude pastures and crops, which was discussed during our council meeting. However, that doesn't address all types of farmlands or agricultural uses. Therefore, I came up with option 3, which would be to exclude all normal farm practices. So no normal farm practices would need to have a clearance of 1.5 meters along their property lines if a complaint were to be submitted. What a normal farm practice is defined under the farming, I can't see that side of my screen, but you guys can see it, I assume, council members. By definition is conducted in a manner consistent with proper and acceptable customs and standards as established and followed by similar agricultural operations under similar circumstances, or B, makes use of innovative technology in a manner consistent with proper advanced farm management practices. Therefore, this addresses any type of agricultural use of a property. I came with the conclusion of we have a concern regarding agricultural use properties in regards to the 1.5 meter buffer strip. So someone submits a complaint against your property, you're an agricultural property, you have a bunch of naturalized area, let's say a couple of acres of it, more than a couple. You don't want to have to go around and clear that 1.5 meter buffer strip because it would be honestly a waste of time. Therefore, it would come down to there's an exception in our bylaw that states any normal farm practice is excluded from doing the 1.5 meter buffer strip around their properties. The impact of not regulating these farmlands, although there is no enforcement to cut the grass, officers will still attempt to mediate the situation. Therefore, if a complaint does come in regarding an agricultural property with their grass being too long, let's say abutting a residential property, I could still ask the farmers if they'd mind cutting it. However, I could not force them to do it. Ultimately, the land used for normal farm practice will not be subject to cut their grass under this proposed bylaw. I see Deputy Mayor Warden waving his hand.
Yeah, so I guess before we continue on to the next section, I have a comment also, but I'll go to Deputy Mayor Warden first.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Veronica, I think that's great in regards to the agricultural practices, but what about like I'm thinking at the corner of Chapel Road and County Road 18 up at the top of the hill. It's rurally designated land, but nothing really happens on that property. And the actual frontage of that property, for example, fronts on Beaverbrook Road. Like, so they're supposed to cut 1.5 meters like around the edge of their property line. Like I'm concerned about the people that own acres of land that aren't farmers or aren't agricultural, just have you know, just own 100 acres and it's just natural vegetation. What about those guys? And they don't fall, in my opinion, they don't fall under the definition of agricultural or farmers per se, but I also don't think they should have to cut all the way around their property line. It's a little farcical.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, it would go back to the point of, would a complaint come in for that property? We only enforce it based on complaints. Understandably, it is written in the bylaw at this point that it must be done, and we would assume that people and residents would follow the bylaws. However, unless someone were to complain about that property, there would be no enforcement to it.
Right, but I don't think it should be in there. There needs to be a limit on that, because if somebody hates their neighbor and finds out about this bylaw, and then you know how that works. When somebody makes a complaint, you have to, as our bylaw officer, you have to follow up. You are mandated to, and you have to enforce the bylaw as it's written. I just think that is silly, and I don't think it should be in there. Or there has to be a limitation on a number of acres, because I know the municipality, as do all the other members, there's a lot of land that's just land. It's not farmed and it's not really utilized. It's sitting there. It's owned by somebody. And if somebody takes a hate, sees this new bylaw, here we are trying to enforce something that it just does not make sense. So I think we need to do a little more work on that and figure out a way that Yes, I think there are places in our municipality where having someone look after their land to respect their neighbor and stuff, I think there's merit to that. But I think it's too vague at this time, and I think we got to figure out a way that my the Hatfield and McCoys, they don't like each other and they own a bunch of land and they're not farming. How do we make sure that doesn't happen, where they can call you, make a formal complaint, and then one of them has to cut? You get my point.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, cutting the 1.5 meter buffer strip for vacant lands or naturalized areas isn't something new for this bylaw. I 100% agree with Deputy Mayor Warden that it would be ridiculous if there is feuding complaints regarding neighbors. We do scan through our validity of complaints, and it does not include vindictive complaints. If that were the case, the person complaining has to show that it's affecting or disrupting their life in some way, shape, or form. Therefore, the grass that's being cut, for example, he gave the Chapel Road location, there's already going to be a 1.5 meter buffer strip due to the township and the counties cutting the grass in that corner. Obviously, not all properties would have, roads that are there to have that 1.5 meter cut. But if it is the case, would you as a neighbor want that grass to be cut? Would you want to see it? Or as a council member, you're driving down the road and you see this field would definitely need to be cut and trimmed. It looks ridiculous in our township. It's more of a beautification plan versus a...
Well, I think that's crossing the line. I think if there's no provincial laws being broken, and it is rural land, no, I don't think we need to be dictating or even have a bylaw written that potentially could force somebody. In that property that I was referring to, I was more you made a point about the dishes being cut, and that was great. I was more concerned about the interior of the line where it butts the next property owner, and where the public's not going to see any of this. Anyways, I just think I think there's merit to some of the language, but I think we definitely need to make sure that we're excluding a lot of land in our municipality. And I honestly do not think that we have I don't think it's our business to force a landowner, to start cutting if there's metrics for that. And that situation, I just don't think we should be getting into that business.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And I agree with Deputy Mayor Warren on the fact that I think, we have to start realizing where we do live. We do live in a rural community. We do live in a rural municipality. I'd rather see this be shortened to hamlets and, subdivision areas. And there could be a buffer maybe around the hamlet area and,
Sure.
a lot or two lots distance away from it. But I think we need to start leaving the rural area alone. I don't want to get into neighbor disputes and then we have to make a decision if we're going to enforce it or not enforce it. I think if we're not there and we don't get involved with it, I think is the best result. I'm going to move to Councillor Matinel, then Councillor Lang, and then Mrs. Haley. Who's first? Councillor Matinel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my comment to that would be echoing Deputy Mayor Warden's. I do not want to be telling people who have rural land, who have, say, even a 10-acre field, that they're cutting maybe 2 cuts of hay off it in a year. They're not putting any fertilizer on. They're not reseeding it. They've just got this little piece. They own it. It's paid off. They have no need to really go and try to really farm it. They're doing it for fun as a hobby, and they're selling a couple of bales a year. I don't want to be telling them they got to go and cutting a 1.5 meters around the edge of the field just for the sake of keeping a couple of lots happy on the edge. To that point, I think people have to realize where they live. They've got the privilege to walk down a township road or a county road. They've got the opportunity that their neighbors are spread out far away. That this is the one sacrifice they have to put up with is a few smells and a bit of noise here and there. And it's not always going to be pretty, but for the most part, farmers are going to keep it clean. My other comment, I guess, in case how are we defining normal farm practices? I mean, I know the definition, but to an extent, whenever we look at it, are we considering, you know, I'll give you an example of my farm. I have a farm where we have probably 23 acres of bush that backs onto the road. Does that mean I'm going to have to cut that grass along the edge of the road right inside the bush? Or because we cut 9-10 acres of grass along roadways and between yards, it's labor intensive for us to go down with a whippersnapper to start cutting grass along the roadways inside the bush. Just doesn't make any sense to me. So I want to be sure that that's covered there. I would personally like to see this bylaw leave the rural zone completely out of it and not touch them at all. But I don't know what the rest of council is feeling.
I think the deputy mayor and myself agree with that. I think that's our opinions also, is respect that, leave it to the hamlets and the subdivision areas. So yeah, so I appreciate the comments. I'll move to Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Thank you, Veronica, for the presentation, for changing a few things, and for the help you gave me today when I phoned in. I might have a solution for this. This is called a clean yard bylaw. It's not a clean farm bylaw. It's not a clean rural property bylaw. It's a clean yard bylaw. And one paragraph that gives us the most headaches is section 2.1B number 2. And it just says, for properties located outside of those settlement areas, they have to maintain this 1.5 meter property line. If we changed it from properties outside of the settlement area to yards, just yards, and I haven't heard exactly what Veronica's definition of a yard is yet, so I'm kind of hesitant till I know what the definition of a yard is. But, and I have no problem if we want to take all rural areas out, if that's the will of council, I can live with that. But if council wants to leave something in there so that the rural yards, and there's a few, we know where some of the few are, that in this county that do need some, like some of them are driving down neighbors' property values, they've got old wrecked cars, they've got all kinds of stuff in their rural yards. So we want to be able to tidy up those yards without touching the rest of the properties, or without touching the bush and the pasture and the naturalized areas. Take out the word property in that paragraph and just say for rural yards, and hopefully a yard is, you know, the area around your house that where you mow the grass and where you would tend to conduct your, you know, socializing in your, close to your house. Then I would be okay with having to keep my rural yard tidy without having to worry about the back 40 or the, you know, the farm we have 4 miles up the road and these sort of things. And I don't know if that is agreeable to everybody. And if you want to take out all rural properties, I'm okay with that too. But I would, if you want to keep those rural yards tidy, just say yards, don't say the whole property. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bernick. Do you have a reply to that in regards to yards? I know you talked about it, so can you tell us what your definition is?
There's the definition of yard would be means the land other than publicly owned land around or opportunent to the whole or any part of a residential or non-residential property and used or capable of being used in connection with the property. Therefore, it's not just the part where you cut, it's everything outside of where the house is. This is the same definition that is in our property standards bylaw, and we tend to keep them all the same so that there is no confusion amongst the bylaws. Therefore, in this case, I do believe the solution would be to take out completely section 2.1B2. At that point, we only address section 2.1A, which includes urban and rural settlement areas, but nothing outside of that.
Okay, I think that's what council is looking for, so maybe if you can do that for the third reading, and then we'll look at it at that point. I believe Mrs. Haley had a comment, and then Councillor Jaworski, and then back to Deputy Mayor Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Good evening, everyone, and members of the public. What I was going to add to that is there's language already in our zoning bylaw as well as our official plan. I think that would speak to what council is looking for to ensure that we're not including every rural property that would be unreasonable to maintain if it's not developed. So we can work with Veronica in that to make sure there's consistencies with our planning documents. And I think Veronica just had an excellent suggestion, so did Councillor Lang. So I don't see there's any reason why we can't have an ideal bylaw presented to you for the third reading that will make everyone happy. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you through you, Ms. Mayor. I don't want to repeat what everyone said because there's a lot of, I mean, I agree with mostly pretty much everything that's been said on this topic. I think, you know, in summary, I don't think the rules that, you know, apply in hamlets or the expectations that people have in hamlets should be, you know, imposed on rural properties. And I think, you know, the property size that Deputy Mayor Warden was describing, you know, like a 10-acre or a 5-acre property that's, you know, in the rural area, I don't think it makes, you know, it doesn't make sense in my mind to be cutting around, you know, a strip around their property. I think it's, you know, it's not environmentally friendly. I think, you know, if someone has a field that they want to let go fallow and, you know, invite, you know, and then you have, you know, ground nesting birds or what have you, I think that there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't think we should be encouraging them to go in and cut it down and, you know, spend fuel and disturb just for the sake of, you know, more of a city type look, which is really, you know, we are in a rural township. And I think there's nothing wrong with keeping it, you know, not trying to change those expectations to something that it's not. So whether it means, but one thing though, in terms of this bylaw, I mean, one thing that does happen sometimes in rural areas is certain properties become, you know, basically dumps for trash. So I think that's very important that, you know, we can still go with those going forward, the ones that really do impact the property value of their neighbors. I think that's the real key. Cutting, you know, having your grass cut in a rural area doesn't have any impact on your neighbor's property value. We're talking about ones that really are negatively impacting their neighbors. So so I don't know how that should be written in, but certainly this grass cutting issue for rural properties doesn't make sense.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to Deputy Mayor Warden and then Councillor McDonnell.
Okay, thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Joanne brought up a point, and so did Martin. I agree. Like, I don't think we should be letting 1-acre lots out on the 6th concession turn into dumps. I think we need to have a metrics so that we can say, look, you have to keep your yard clean, and we all can, you know, speak to specific properties that are less than desirable. I like the word developed. I like the word like a developed property, you know, but I think that I don't necessarily agree with a blanket nothing in the rural area. I just think we need to figure out a way that we can have a little bit of teeth to go after if somebody complains to the neighbor that has, you know, like, I don't want to pick a specific road, but let's just say Somerstown Road. And, you know, north of Somerstown Road, north of the South Branch, County Road 27 and County Road 19, there's a lot of houses that are, you know, they're built up and they're side by side and they're in the rural setting. Well, if one house, you know, becomes a bit of a dump, it definitely, as Councillor Lang said, it negatively affects the next houses beside. So I think we need to have language in there that those houses would fall under this bylaw, and Veronica would be able to have, Veronique would be able to have the ability to go there if somebody complains, but also not, you know, not acreage that I spoke to before. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. I think she appreciates and understands what we're looking for, I think, in regards to what she's going to bring back for the 3rd reading, so we'll wait for that. But I'll move to Councillor McDonnell.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I did have a question in regards to 2.7 A2 and B when it comes to waste. Providing like my major concern here was if somebody was doing a major renovation of a home and was gutting a house, this effectively says they can't use, example, a dump trailer to walk out of the house, throw it in a dump trailer and fill that repetitively. It would have to be dumped over 10 days. Like within 10 days, you'd have to have that dump trailer dumped, say, but you couldn't actually use a dump trailer considering that we're saying it has to have a tight fitting cover. Or example, say one of those, I think it's godjunk.com will bring a basically a sea can with the top off it, and they'll drop it in your yard. You can fill it up. They'll come and pick it up. But when they pick it up, they slide a tarp over top of it. So that does limit anybody trying to do a renovation. So somebody doing a renovation could be subject to this bylaw that they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to clean up a house maybe in a settlement area that isn't as nice, but we're semi-limiting them as to how they're going to get rid of their garbage. I guess just to take that into consideration.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it comes back to the bylaw is subjective to the officer. Therefore, if I were to get a complaint regarding this house is under construction, but there's garbage all over, and I arrive and I see that it's a sea canner of the sorts, and they're currently using it for the construction, then it wouldn't be enforced. The complaint would be invalid due to the building code. But this section is more regarding residential waste. I see that it doesn't actually say residential waste at this point, though.
I guess through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess I would just ask that we maybe specify it a little bit more. Just, I hate to see somebody, you know, trying to do good by the community, cleaning up an old home, and, you know, whether they're flipping it or turning it into a home for themselves. I just hate to see us limit them to ways to get rid of that waste. As it can be difficult. I mean, the dump trailer is the optimal way, in my opinion, to do it. I know we've done it before. It's easy to get rid of. But it's just, I don't want to limit anybody and have it a 2020 sign site.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe I could put in an exception that states construction would be an exception to this section of the bylaw.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, thank you. And again, I think you know where we want to go in regards to that issue, so we'll wait for the reply coming back at the next meeting, or meetings in a couple of meetings, I guess. But I'll move to Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. And I hope we've kind of started. Veronica didn't get to finish her presentation, but I think we've all read this thing. Most of us read it numerous times because we're quite concerned that we get it right. So, you know, since we're going to go on to other points, and Mr. McDowell brought up 2.7, I'd like to bring up 2.3A. And I've mentioned this to quite a few people ahead of time, but just to make sure everybody's aware that if we pass 2.3A, every owner or occupant of a property, and that's all properties, rural or you know, settlement areas, shall keep the boulevard adjacent to the property free and clear of all waste. And that is basically telling the public that we are expecting them to keep the ditches free of waste. And the boulevard, in the definitions, is the area between the traveled portion of the road and the fence. So the ditch is basically, so are we willing to tell all property owners that they have to keep all the ditches along their property that they own free of garbage? Basically, we have to pick up all the garbage. In a case of somebody like Mr. McDonnell or herself, it might amount to 10, 15 kilometers, depending on how big the farm was or how many parcels of land they own and along which roads they're on. So I'm just not sure that, you know, and I know that our roads people do pick up stuff in the roads, and I haven't heard of anybody having to, I don't know if this is in effect, but if we write it, are we willing to enforce it? Are we willing to tell everybody that they have to keep the garbage out of the ditch all along the property they own? So just think that over.
Burnett?
Oh, for me, it doesn't change anything, Mr. Mayor. That would be up to council if it's something they're willing to enforce or not. I believe with the calls that I receive, most of them are on county roads, and they call complaining that it's the property owners complaining themselves that someone's dumped all the garbage on their property in the ditch, at which point I just contact the counties, or I'd contact our roads department to clean it up. This would be addressing more properties that have waste and garbage on their personal property, and it has gotten into the ditch, at which point they do need to maintain that. They do need to pick it up.
But this one doesn't clarify that, though. This one, like Councillor Lang said, it basically says the boulevard adjacent to their property. So it's not their personal property, it's adjacent to their property.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, the property itself, like, let's say my property, the garbage was at the end of the road, the animals got to it that night, and now it's all it's on the boulevard. I would have to clean that up. That is my responsibility. It wouldn't be the responsibility of the township to come and clean that section up.
Yeah, so maybe can we look at that a little bit further just to see if we can stretch it out a little bit more in regards to some clarification on it, because I think it's a little confusing and respect. I know maybe what you're suggesting or what you're thinking at the end of the day, but we have to think about the future in regards to this also. So I'll move to Councillor McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to that point, I had spoke with Klang earlier today, and that was when I agree with him. I know we would be doing probably, I took a look at it, probably about 10 kilometers of ditches, cleaning garbage out of them. I know we do it in front of the home farm, and I think we're the perfect distance from McDonald's and Tim Hortons for picking it up. It's a very tedious job, and I hate to have, we have a few farms with lots out of the farm, and there would be a lot of places where I know people have complained to us before, and we've been told, you know, there's this in the ditch, or go and pick it up, and whatnot. We've never thought to call the township to go and pick it up, but it would be an onerous job to be going down picking up garbage every week, and I'd just like to see that I guess that opportunity for a complaint eliminated, just because I could see it being abused.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just quick comment on that. I think, I mean, the purpose of that line is to ensure that someone who, you know, is accumulating stuff, so, you know, dumping situation or hoarding situation, if it's to ensure that their junk doesn't encroach into the board, then I think it should be written that way, so that their own waste should not be, like, they shouldn't start using township or the road allowance, start storing their junk as well. But I mean, I think this idea of property owners going and picking up garbage that other people have thrown into the ditch, you know, passing cars or what have you, I don't think we should be asking our residents to be doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it just has to be more clear. Maybe we can work on that, Ms. Brennan.
For sure.
Okay, did you have any further things to add, or?
I don't believe so. I'm just going to check my PowerPoint.
Okay.
No, I believe that was it. There was just a comment made regarding garbage being accumulated for more than 10 days, if that wanted to be extended to allow residents to have it there longer. Any comments to this?
So you mean garbage on the property? Is that what you're suggesting? Is that?
So section 2.7b, for your garbage, your waste that's being put out weekly, if you miss it or something occurs, is 10 days not long enough for it to be accumulated, or is it a proper time? I see Mr. Lang, Councillor Lang has his hand up.
Yeah, I'll move to Councillor Lang. I may have a comment also. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Yeah, it was me that mentioned it in the first place, and my only thinking on it was that it's not a big deal, but if I miss garbage pickup 1 week, then I have 7 days of garbage accumulated. You know, if it's 10 days that I have to be gone, I don't have a chance to get to the next week. So I just think, you know, give them 14 days. So if they happen to miss their garbage pickup 1 week, they can get it in the next one. So I can't see where people would complain about it. I don't know how people would even know about it, but I just thought 14 days, at least you get 2 pickups if you happen to miss one. It's not a big deal, but whatever you think there.
Yeah, I agree with that also. Deputy Mayor Warden.
I was wondering if that even has to be in there. Like, so I myself sometimes don't put garbage out for a month. I'm not at my house a lot. Now I store it on my property in a proper way. I don't think anybody's complained. I'm here in the village of Lancaster. I had about 14 recycling bags because I missed that 2 times in a row. I got my weeks mixed up, and then I was out of town the second time. I store it on my property in the back. Like, some of this stuff is definitely good. Some of it, does that line have to be in there? Is this something that we're dealing with on a regular basis, that it has to be in the bylaw? Because, you know, are you trying to cover all your bases so we're doing it all at once, or is a lot of this stuff that you've had to deal with and it should be dealt with? Because, like, that line to me could come out altogether.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, this is something that occurred 11 times last summer. Because the properties do forget to put it out, or they just don't do it. There was properties that were on vacation and didn't have anyone else go put it out for them. And the complaints did come in due to the amount of rodents it brought in, as well as the smell and You can
Oh,
imagine what some of these look like.
Then if that's something that's fair, then then clearly that has to be in there. It's not something that I ever heard before. So, okay.
I would suggest that we maybe move it to the 14 days, just gives them that opportunity for the following week. But my question is, if they don't comply with the 14 days, what do we do? What are we doing after that?
At that point, they are given the option to bring it to the dump themselves. If they don't do it, we do the work and charge it to them.
But don't you have to start a process where you have to send them a written notice, and then you gotta, so that's kind of why, like, it's kind of why I feel it's pointless, because by the time you go through all that process, the garbage is gonna have been gone, and it's a waste of your time. I get it that the smell is there, but by the time you send them a registered letter that you've received a complaint, or doing all your normal formalized steps that you have to do, because if we end up in court for whatever reason, I don't know.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, it comes back down to, it never gets to that point. For me, at least, it hasn't. I get the complaint, and I cannot receive a complaint and go speak to the person unless it's valid, right? So if the person complains saying it's been there for 12 days and he still hasn't done anything, I call the property owner. What's a reasonable amount of time for you to get rid of your garbage? And they tell me, give me 2 days, I'll bring it to the dump. My pal's coming down. It's completed. I don't need to go through any other steps to do it. Last year, that is what happened. It was, I'll get someone to go down and do it.
Okay, cool.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? If none, I'll have a motion on the table by Stephanie Dorsey, second by Martin Lang. Be resolved that staff report number 37-2020 be received, and that bylaw 11-2020, being a bylaw to provide for the maintenance of land in a clean, clear, and safe condition in the Township of South Glengarry, be read a second time the 6th day of April 2020. You heard the motion. All in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you. We look forward to the third reading. Thank you, Ms. Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And the number 4 is proposed fence bylaw. Ms. Burnett.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor, council members, staff, as well as members of the public. Today, we are going to be reading for the first time the fence bylaw. The reason for it is because the property maintenance bylaw initially, so the previous bylaw, had fences inside of it. Now we're removing that and creating this bylaw, as well as the clean yards one. I'm going to attempt to share my screen again. Everyone has a nice view.
Yep.
So this is all, as I just said, we need to have address fences in some way since it's no longer in the clean yards bylaw. These are the strategic plan and how the bylaw work together. So this fence bylaw will now be able to address the definition of a fence, which it actually never did previously. It'll limit the types of material used to construct the fence. It'll prohibit the use of hazardous and electrical materials. It'll define where a fence may be located. It'll define the height limitations by zone. It'll also address privacy screens. Hoarding is still in there. We did remove hoarding since it falls under the actual definition of fence. Discusses the limitation of fences on decks. It regulates the maintenance and standard of the fence. It allows for temporary fencing as per the township's request. It also addresses fences created in the past in regards to this new bylaw. The set fines for this range from $150 for all of them, and officer obstruct is always $350. And then there's the fees and costs with the 30% if the township ever has to do the work. This is the same enforcement as all of our other bylaws. A comparison amongst different municipalities, whether or not they are addressing fencing and if there are any fines. North Dundas, South Dundas, as well as Alfred Plantagenet all address it under their property standards bylaw. We do not. North Stormont and North Glengarry do not address it at all. South Stormont, Cornwall, and Russell all address it in a fence bylaw. And as you can see here, the only townships that have set fines are South Dundas as well as South Stormont. Due to the proposed clean yard bylaw, it's necessary to create a fence bylaw. Although the township does not receive ample complaints regarding fences, it would be vital to be able to address a concern if there is one that arises. Most of our calls regarding fences are just inquiries. Do I need a permit for it? How big, how tall can it be on the side of my property? Am I allowed to have one in the front? Things of such, at which point we'd like to be able to address them with the bylaw. They'll be able to be addressed in all of our zones and different types of properties within our municipality. The enforcement model always remains the same. I will always begin with conversation and education, followed by a notice or an order, and then the final step, if I ever have to get to it, cost, fees, and fines. Any questions?
Yeah, we have one from Councillor Matinell and Deputy Mayor Warden.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I was thinking about this bylaw as I did a little run today. I drove down Highway 43 and it kind of came to my mind. I know we had an old rail fence up at the farm and we had replaced it a little while ago, and I know what it costs us to replace it. I mean, are we going to be enforcing this all out in our rural areas as well? I mean, we have some places maybe a corner post is broken and they've kind of made a quick fix on it. Are we going to have farmers subject to this and maybe other rural residents subject to this as well? Or is this mostly for fences within the urban settlement areas?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this addresses just fences in general. Therefore, in here, it states that they need to be maintained in a specific form. It doesn't say the entire, every post needs to be in the ground properly and without any deterioration. It's obvious that fences will, within time, need to be replaced and fixed, but there is no separation between how the fences need to look. However, there is a separation between the types of fences permitted in commercial, industrial, institution, and open space zones. And agricultural properties also have their own regulations regarding electrical, barbed wire, there are specific heights for animals, and that falls under the Farming Act as well. If that answers the question.
Thank you. We'll move to Deputy Mayor
It
Warden.
does, and
Go ahead.
Oh, Sam got cut off. I'll let Sam finish if he wants.
Yep.
I just did want to confirm, we don't need a permit for a fence, right?
No permits.
Okay. I have more concerns on this than the last staff report. I don't like fines. I think it's silly that we have a fine here, fail to remove a temporary snow fence. Like, that's not the mandate of a municipality as far as I'm concerned. $150. What a fence erected on lands owned by township? Like, could you explain that scenario for me, Veronique?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Deputy Mayor, are you speaking? You want an example for erect a fence on lands owned by township?
Yeah, like, where would that fine apply? Where would that fine be applied?
So and this is actually in here because it happened last summer and I didn't realize it. And obviously I go through best practices and other municipalities do have it. Lancaster Heights, for example, the township owns a ton of land in the back fields by the quarry in between Concession 10 and Lancaster Heights. Mm-hmm. There are residents that went and erected fences in our municipal lands for hunting purposes. Now, those are our lands. So one, it was trespassing. We don't regulate those areas for trespassing, no, because it's free. It's recreational use most of the time. Mm-hmm. However, there was fences put in there prohibiting other residents from using it at this point. Now, it was for their safety because they were hunting. However, they put up fencing in municipal lands, which was not permitted at the time. And in this bylaw wouldn't be permitted either. Now, sorry, go ahead.
No, I guess I would say that shouldn't we be looking after our lands a little more? Like, if you're writing a bylaw like this, clearly no one that was out to those lands ever, and just, I don't know how you found out about it. Maybe somebody called. Okay, that's a very good explanation of that one. Thank you. Now, I guess the Veronica, is this going to be complaint based?
All the time. Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor Warden, it's always complaint based in every one of our bylaws. Therefore, the set fines are there in case of, and typically it's seen with history of all municipalities in Ontario on repeat offenders. We always take the educational approach first. However, if it's, for example, like this hunter that goes out over and over again every season putting up fences there could be, the opportunity to go criminally, or the trespass act,
Yeah.
but we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to go that far, because that fine is up to $5,000.
Right.
Here we fine $150. We never want to get to this point. However, if needed, it's available.
Okay, that's a very good explanation. I guess, yeah. So I was just, the one that caught my eye, and I went over it with Councillor Jaworski, was the ordering somebody to fence something. Ordering someone to put up a temporary fence, and that one really caught my eye, and I was looking for a little bit of context behind why that's in here.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor Warden, that is specifically for properties either under construction, or, for example, we have a few property standards issue currently where the house is literally falling over. But due to the circumstances we're in right now, we can't get the property owners to come and demolish their house. Therefore, we would require them to put up temporary fencing around their property for the safeguarding of other people. It would also happen for open excavation pits, things like that, where they aren't putting up fencing, but the public feels that it would be a safety requirement.
Okay, there's some of those contexts. I see that. I just concerned that, property owners should have some of the rights of their own, and I would assume that legislation in regards to construction, specifically open holes and whatnot, there's legislation, that health and safety legislation that to me would already blanket that situation, and it would be, to me, just double over legislation.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I 100% agree with you. We don't want to be redundant on acts that already exist. However, for the township to be able to enforce it, it would need to be a bylaw. Now, specifically speaking, there was a property on Airport Road that the township technically owned. Now, the building was falling over onto the road area. Now, that part was removed. However, the rest of it was still unsafe, and it was public access there. So we requested ourselves, the road department, to put up that temporary fencing.
Okay. I just found it here. It's 7.7. And what caught my eye on the wording was, where in the opinion of the manager, property contains an unsafe situation or hazard to the public, the manager may require the owner to erect such a fencing. So this would only be after the complaint is called in? Correct. Okay.
Unless we see an immediate immediate safety issue, at which point no complaint is needed.
Right, but you're not going to be driving down the roads looking for holes.
Not at all, no.
Okay. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
I personally don't have an issue with that one. I think we have to protect everybody. Well, we're here to protect the landowner, but we have to also protect the rest of the residents and the safety of the residents also. So I have no issue with that one. But Councillor Jaworski, please.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Veronique. A question for you. So this is sort of similar to the question that Deputy Mayor Warden asked the first bylaw presentation. Is really, can you talk a bit more about the calls that you get that make it that we need to have a bylaw like this? Like, what are the the calls and complaints that you're getting that you feel need to be solved by having this bylaw?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the majority of the calls that came in through the past years, as well as when I was a student, are all just inquiries about what are they allowed to do with their fence. Now, the fencing bylaw at the time basically only talked about the heights of the fence. So you're allowed 1 meter in the front and up to 2 meters in the back. What we began to see with more construction in our urban settlement areas are semi-detached or duplexes where they have a deck in the backyard, but and then they had no separation between them. And we had no regulation regarding it. Residents were installing privacy screens, which we now are able to address with our new bylaw. Now, some of these privacy screens exceeded 3 meters in height. Some of them were decrepit and falling over, but we weren't able to address those issues because there was nothing in our bylaw at the time, which is why for this bylaw specifically, I added the privacy screens, which are the divisions between properties on a deck, and we regulated the height of those screens. I just see a hand go up, sorry.
Okay.
No. But if I can, so from what you're describing there, it sounds like, again, this is more like an urban issue where people are asking, like, how can a fence be, and trying to maintain fences in more urban areas. Like, do you get a lot of questions outside of the urban areas, and you know, why we would need to regulate there as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it came back down to, we actually had 3 people last year apply for a fence line viewing, and only one, I believe, went through with it. However, our bylaws, we don't want to have to get to the point of going through a fence line viewing committee. We want to be able to address it prior to that, hopefully through mediation, and those happen with agricultural properties. So the cows broke the fence and they went loose. They went onto the road, into the neighboring properties. I want my neighbor to fix that fence. It's been broken for 3 years, but he keeps just doing these temporary fixes. At that point, we're able to address it and request that he, you know, properly maintain that fence to limit the animals from coming out. It also happens when the rural property abuts a residential property, and the fence where the property line is going like this onto the residential property. We're able to address those because they have to be structurally sound. Those are the majority of the complaints that I can think of off the top of my head regarding outside of urban settlement areas.
Okay, Councillor Jaworski, do you have anything further?
I guess I'm just still trying to work through, like, how much value there is to adding. I mean, it seems like those kind of issues can be dealt with outside of a bylaw. Like if your fence is encroaching on someone else's property, I mean, I don't know if that's really up to the township to tell people to fix that, but I said perhaps it's a tool. Sorry, I'm sort of out loud here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you, Veronica, for the presentation. And I think you made some points about the rural areas. I do think, just by the way you're talking, it sounds like most of our concerns and most of the queries are for settlement areas. We do have line fence viewers in the township and across this province, and the Line Fence Act, as far as the agriculture community, has served us well for many, many years. And it's still, I see actually in the information only, it's been sent back to OMAFRA, which is where I think it should have been all the time. But anyway, I think I'm kind of leaning at this point that if we want to test run this fence thing, that we do it in settlement areas and leave the rural areas. If it sounds like we're not getting a lot of complaints from there anyway, and we have a Line Fence Act that can deal with some of those, like, we're not that built up yet, and I want to keep the rural flavor that we have here. I want to keep it, you know, kind of, you know, the way it is in some ways, unless we get a lot of issues, and we can always readdress these bylaws and come back and change things later, you know. So that's my thinking at the moment, is we try this for settlement areas and leave the rural areas out of it for now.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Lang. I'll move to Councillor McDonnell.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to agree. I agree with Councillor Lang. I think we should just leave this to the settlement area for now. I think that's where the majority of our issues are, and I think maybe just putting it out to the rural might just start to create calls for no reason. One that came to mind was, I mean, we put a limit on the height of an agricultural fence at 6 feet, but if I remember correctly, I remember going to a deer farm, and I mean, they're 8 feet high, 10 feet high. I mean, I think we're just putting restrictions in where maybe we aren't as qualified to be putting in restrictions. I just think let's stick to the settlement area, leave the rural side alone. And if we do have issues, I'm fairly confident that if there's issues in the rural area, I think we can kind of mediate an issue. If there is an issue, we can mediate it, and I think a solution can be arrived at without a bylaw.
Okay, thank you. So this is just a first and second reading. So Ms. Bruin, if you can bring those concerns back, I guess, in respect of changing some of those things that council is looking for before you bring back your third reading, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, pleasure, thank you. I have a motion moved by Sam Antonell, second by Lyle Warden. Be resolved that staff report 38-2020 be received and that bylaw 13-2020, being a bylaw to regulate fences, be read a first and second time the 6th day of April 2020. You heard the motion. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Thank you. We look forward to the third reading. Thank you. Okay, and should we go to number 5 or skip that one? We'll move to number 5, the appointment of the Deputy Fire Chief, Chief Robertson.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In our 2020 budget, council approved for a new position, that being the training officer position for the municipality. I'm happy to announce to council and to the community that we've engaged James Walker to that role. James is in attendance at our meeting tonight. And I know that in my absence 3 weeks ago, Mr. Walker was called upon to serve when council had a meeting in regards to the situation with COVID-19, and I thank him for that. And I know he did well at that meeting, represented the fire service very well at that meeting. So in addition to the training officer role, and in the interest of business continuity, James will also take on the role of deputy chief. In our current model and our traditional model, each of our 5 stations has a deputy chief as the leader in that facility. We're going to change the title of that position to station chief, which better represents the actual the role that they perform. So a requirement of the Fire Protection and Prevention Act is to have the role of fire chief appointed by bylaw, sorry. In his or her absence, the deputy fire chief shall assume all the duties of the act. I feel that it's important. It is not a requirement for a municipality to have the deputy chief position fulfilled through a bylaw. I feel that it is important to have that position and the individual named through a bylaw, just so that if that person is called on to act in the stead of the fire chief, then it's very clear that that person has all the powers of the fire chief. So attached, you will find the actual bylaw. It speaks to the fact that James Walker will be appointed to the deputy chief position for the corporation of the Township of South Glengarry, and it'll come into enforce if it passed by council this evening. Thank you. Any questions?
Deputy Mayor Warden.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. He didn't sing "O Canada," so I'm on the fence here. I have no questions or concerns. I think council approved the creation of this position, and I know, James, you've served our fire department well up to this far, and I trust you'll continue to do well under the new title. So congratulations, I guess.
Thanks.
Okay, if there's no other comments or questions,
No, I think
sorry, Dave, I'm coming right back to you.
Thank you, Dave, for noticing me. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. So formally welcome, James. I mean, we were at this meeting earlier, but welcome again. I just wanted to reiterate something that when we put this forward the last time, is that I think something that's going to be very important with this role, because it is an additional role and it is about augmenting, you know, the training capabilities and our training effectiveness. I think it's really important that we, you know, we make sure that we have tricks in place to ensure that, you know, that we can demonstrate the training, you know, the progress that we've made over time now having this new position. So I want to make sure that that is right at an expectation right at the onset. But thanks again, James, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. That very much is in our business plan for 2020, is to establish goals and benchmarks and report to council when we complete those. So, yeah. I think Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor Warden had an additional.
I believe so. Yeah, go ahead, Deputy Mayor Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Subsequent, yeah, I wanted to bring up, now that we'll have an additional position at top, Dave, I was wondering if council could get like regular updates, like fire calls, what we're doing, just to give us, now that we have the extra hands on deck, on a regular basis, to kind of give us reports. You know, I don't know what that metric is, monthly, quarterly. You know, these were the amount of calls we received, medical, just to be able to build some stats on and to help us plan for the future. So that was just one thing I'm hoping with this creation that can be added to the list.
Excellent point. We have all those statistics currently. We can all, with fellow administration, we'll come up with a scenario that on a reporting schedule that fits sort of with them, and we'll approach you with that and confirm that that meets council's visions.
Thank you very much, Chief. I think that'll be a great additional information for us and the community.
Yeah, most definitely. I thank you for your comments, Deputy Mayor Warden, prior about. I should have prefaced my whole speech to mention that Mr. Walker, James, doesn't come from the outside. James has been with our department for a number of years. He's held multiple ranks, multiple management ranks, the most recent being Assistant Deputy Chief out of Station 1 in Glenwalter, and training officer positions. So we're very excited, and we've received numerous congratulations to James, and compliments. The staff in our department are excited to move forward with James as in his role as training officer. So,
okay, thank you. I have a motion on the table, moved by Martin Lang, second by Stephanie Jaworski. Be it resolved that staff report 45-2020 be received, and that bylaw 19-2020, being a bylaw to appoint deputy fire chief, be read a first, second, and third time, passed, signed, and sealed in open council the 6th day of April 2020. You heard the motion. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Mr. Walker, I echo the rest of the comments that were made around the table this evening. So congratulations to you. Welcome to the team, and we look forward to having you on our team. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to amend the approved site plan control agreement for Karen and John Warden. Mrs. Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry for the delay. I'm hoping that the staff report before you is self-explanatory. Council has seen this before. We're in the circumstances where the property owner just needs a little bit more time to be able to achieve the requirements of the site plan control agreement. The deadlines in the site plan control agreement are entirely established by staff with council's approval. So in my opinion, there's no reason to provide the extension that's required or requested in this case. However, I'd be happy to answer any questions that council may have in regards to the request.
Any questions from members of council? I think it's pretty straightforward. I think we've been through it before. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Just quickly, Ms. Haley, so I understand they need a little bit more time, but have we been making progress at all been moving forward?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, we absolutely have been making progress. I think Councillor is aware that the designer they had on board unfortunately had passed away previously, so it required the property owner to retain a new designer or a different designer, and they need a little bit more time. I think we're also working in a really unusual work environment at this point, and so to give people more time to be able to prepare the design and do the submissions, I really think is the right thing to do. The company that's looking after the new design has been in touch with our chief building official. So it's not like the applicant is completely ignoring the situation. They really are trying to make an effort to file a complete application for all the outstanding permits on the specific property.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree. I think under the circumstances with, unfortunately, the previous one passing away and the circumstances we're under today, I don't want to hold anybody up for anything. So I think the flexibility in regards to getting the extension is fine and fair in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a motion moved by Sam McDonnell, second by Martin Lang. Be resolved that staff report 46-2020 be received and that the Council of the Township of South Glengarry approves bylaw 20-2020 and the amended site plan control agreement for the property legally described as part lot 18, concession 2, I.L, and being parts 3 and 4 of reference plan number 14R6088 in the geographic township of Schlottenburg, now in the township of South Glengarry, county of Glengarry, also known as 6275 Boundary Road, and authorizes the mayor and clerk to execute the amended site plan control agreement. You heard the motion. All in favor of the motion? I'm missing two of them. I don't see Deputy Mayor or Councillor McDonnell.
Deputy Mayor recused himself on this.
Yes, sorry, thank you. He does have his hand up?
Yeah.
Okay, motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McDonald. So I forgot about Deputy Mayor Warden. Okay, and the next one was we moved out of the information purposes were corporate services impact on the COVID-19. Mr. Dorsky, did you have certain questions for Mr. McDonald, or do you want him? Go ahead.
Thank you. I do have a question for him, but thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. I get just very quickly. I just wanted to take the opportunity to acknowledge all the folks who are working right now during COVID-19. I mean, obviously we have to recognize all our frontline healthcare workers. To quote Premier Ford, they are the rock stars, and then there's lots of other folks who are really hard in our first responders, our truck drivers, our grocery store workers. But in addition to those essential workers, we also have the folks at the township who are working really hard under very unusual circumstances and doing an excellent job. So I wanted to recognize our township staff right now. So thank you. And then in terms of the specific report, I was hoping that Mr. McDonald Lachlan could explain a little bit more detail about the property assessment issue that's described there, and then also have a follow-up question for him. Thank you.
Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So property tax rates, MPAC will leave the assessments at the 2020 level. In terms of request for reconsideration, they're going to wait 16 days after the province lifts its emergency declaration so they'll have that extra time. Normally it's March 31st. Education tax, they've pushed it back, much like the county's pushed back the March installment for us. We still had to pay education in March, but June will be pushed to September, September to December, and December will still pay in December. But I think you're wanting more on the MPAC side, so they've just held their assessment rates. There'll still be growth and changes. They'll still do their inspections when possible if a new build occurs, but your tax assessment should stay the same, which means next year we'll likely see an increased tax rate, because normally tax rate goes up or down based on MPAC's assessment. So if MPAC stays at present rates, we'll see our tax rate increase potentially.
So to paraphrase, like, we can basically estimate that the assessment rate for this year or next year will be extremely close. We don't expect there to be major changes in terms of growth. Certainly not like assessment value increases like we've seen over the past several years. And on that point, I guess where I'm going with my questioning on this is that, I think we need to be mindful too. I mean, I'd like to understand as we go forward, and depending on how long things go on with COVID-19, like to understand where our spending is versus our budget. And at some point, if it looks like, you know, we will not be spending, I mean, if we will have significant money unspent, you know, perhaps need to start looking at about how we can support our taxpayers in that. They are also, a lot of them are under very significant burdens right now because of the situation. So I would want to, you know, recognizing that, and if there's, you know, I mean, if there's things that we can do to help them, I mean, if we look like we will be having a, you know, large surplus, perhaps that's we need to think about to return that, like make sure that the taxpayer can benefit from that, the ones who are under a lot of duress.
If I may. So there was a conference call for municipal finance officers that occurred on Friday, and they also mentioned that our revenues are at risk too. There will be less business coming through, so it is something that we have to, if we do want to take it into consideration, there is a risk on our revenues as well. Their mention was, if you pass your budget, keep it as is, but obviously it's open to council to look differently into that. As Councillor Jaworski mentioned, there may be a surplus at the end of the year, and at that point it would be easier to give you a firm answer of what we could do with our money. At this present point, I don't have any great forecasts. It's a somewhat unprecedented event, so I don't have any great advice, but as Councillor Jaworski said, if you can think of anything I haven't yet, please share it with me.
Okay, thank you. I believe our CEO, Mr. Mills, has a question or comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So to Councillor Jaworski's question there, we've been meeting every day as a management team, and this has come up a number of times about spending, and we have discussed that you know, managers need to be mindful of that there may become a time in the very near future where we are allocated less funds, i.e. in 2021. And the report that's come forward from Mr. McDonald about impact, that it also will mean that we will have less tax revenue coming in based on assessment. It won't be in 2021, it'll be in 2022 now. So I agree with you that you know, we have a healthy reserve, and you know, Mr. McDonald's done well to hold everybody's feet to the fire over the years to keep adding to the reserve, but that might be something to consider as we go forward, that how much are we going to put in reserve further, especially in this year. The other one is when you talk about efficiencies, I mentioned the modernization funding earlier, and you know, this meeting is a really good example of something that we wouldn't have even thought about doing a month ago. And there are other things that we can now, I think, consider as we move forward that maybe would save the taxpayers money too. So we're going to look at it closely.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move to Councillor McDonnell.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I guess, Mr. McDonald, I guess my only concern was, I guess this is where, I guess we're going to have to, as CEO Mills said, hold your feet a little closer to the fire and keep ourselves on track with our budget and keep a close eye on it, and making our updates on where we're at throughout the year with the budget more important, more than ever. Can you answer a question for me? To my understanding, with provincial legislature, we are safe for 2021 to an extent of we're guaranteed 85% of what we got from them this current year, but 2022 would be our big risk as far as losing any funding. Am I wrong in saying that, or?
That's you're probably referring to the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. Generally, it's 85 or 87%. I believe we are 85%. We got 100% of the previous year this year, but we did see North Stormont. I mentioned at the Municipal Summit, North Stormont actually saw 15% decrease in their funding. And I just have the numbers here in terms of federal and provincial money that we received. So we received $330,000 from the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, $980,000 from the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. So that is a sizable amount. And that's the amount that I believe you're talking about. And then $410,000 from gas tax. But the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund is the one that I had rung alarm bells earlier whenever we got the one-time modernization funding, because it's odd that a government tells you save money, money may change. So you're quite correct. It's something that we do have to hedge for.
So that's on the OMP. The OMP funding.
Correct, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry, I thought I was losing my connection. No, okay. Okay. So I guess as we go forward with budgets or with I guess with deficits growing this year due to COVID-19, do you see, I guess, if a short-term future is in 2 to 5 years where we will see a significant cut, where we should be looking at putting some of these monies away? Or I just personally, I just look at the government we have now with the provincial legislatures is one that's prided themselves on aiming for fiscal prudency, but we're in a situation where that's not feasible or possible. So do we see potential cutbacks coming, or is that something you've heard or you feel?
I guess it's just a concern amongst the Treasury Group and SDNG. I haven't heard anything finitely. I don't get answers when like specific answers from the ministry when I ask those questions. I know Councillor Lang has in the past said funding may not be as guaranteed in the future. I don't know if he's speaking specifically to application-based or formula-based, but I would agree with that sentiment. Be that at the end of the year, we might find ourselves in a surplus position, and then I think that would be an optimal time to talk about how we can help people, but that's not helping people now, which I think Councillor Jaworski's driving at. However, you mentioned a point, Councillor McDonald, that is prudent. Is during this time, I think it's imperative that I am a little bit more detailed in my reporting to see if there is a trend where we're going to save money, and perhaps then come to council and say, this is trending in a certain direction. And what would you like to do with this money if we can do something now or sooner than at the end of the year? That's a ramble.
I would like to see that personally, but yes, no, thank you, Mr. McDonald, or should I call you McDonald?
Sorry about that one. I'm uncomfortable in front of you.
No worries.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer your concerns, Councillor Jaworski?
Yes. Yes. No, thank you. Thank you. We need to really stay on top of it and see if, we do need to readjust that we have the data to do so.
Yep, no, I agree 100%. Okay, so I have a motion moved by Councillor Stephanie Jaworski, second by Lyle Warden. Be resolved that the Council of the Township of South Glengarry accepts the items presented on the agenda as committee reports and for information purposes only. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried, thank you. And we'll move to unfinished business. And docks on township properties, Mr. McDonald.
No update at this point, Mr. Mayor. We're receiving the letters that were sent out. We're receiving some responses, but at this point, we're just waiting for those responses to come back in on those properties.
Did we give them a date in regards to when we want them back? Only based on we're going to be going into the middle of April. I'd like this done before the voting season does occur, whenever that's going to happen. But
I don't recall if we had a date on the letter. I'll have to follow up on that, Mr. Mayor, and see.
March 31st.
Right.
Okay.
March 31st.
There was a March 31st date. I guess given the circumstances, we haven't followed up.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. If we can look into that only to see where the majority of these people stand, because I'd like to get these lots severanced and moved on to the homeowners and sold, so we know where we're going in the future in respect of the summer months coming forward. So I just don't want any arguments or discussions from neighbor to neighbor in respect of having their docks there where they shouldn't be. So if we can wrap this up as soon as possible, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And number 2 is the fire protection ponds.
No update on that file at this time.
And municipal servicing from the city of Cornwall.
We're awaiting the third-party consultant review of the reports. And once we have that, we'll be ready to go back and have further discussions with the city.
Okay, so that, when did that go out to the third party?
About, I would say in early March.
And any anticipation when we're receiving it back?
I don't have a date at this point. I'm going to have to follow up with that third-party consultant.
Okay, if you could follow up with that. I just want to stay on top of it because I know we're under certain issues with COVID-19, but I don't want to, we still need to run the municipality as much as we possibly can. And if we have to do a presentation the same way we're doing our council meetings to the city of Cornwall, I'm prepared to do that. But I just want to continue moving on as time goes on. But, I think we have a question from Councillor McDonnell.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my concern as well was just I guess due to COVID-19, I know we are suffering some setbacks and some slowdowns, but this is one that I would like to see really pushed on and really get to the bottom of. I know before maybe we are suspending council meetings to an extent, or I know the city of Cornwall has made motions that maybe they wouldn't hold some council meetings, so they'd really limit them. So I'd like to get this done as possible.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you for all your work on it, Mr. McDonald.
Okay, thank you. And number 4 is private roads development.
No update on that file at this moment.
Okay, number 5, I think we can skip at this point, which is the Williamstown Garage and Fire Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And number 6 is the LED streetlights for Glen Walter with Cornwall Electric.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we're working with Cornwall Electric and with the contractor consultant firm that did the conversion of the lights in South Glengarry in the Ontario Hydro Service area. The data that they collected at the time did include the Cornwall Electric infrastructure, so we're looking to coordinate the exchange of that data with Cornwall Electric and to come up with some costings and options to move forward with this project for the Cornwall Electric service area in South Glengarry.
Perfect, thank you. And review of waste management program. I guess it's towards the fall.
Yes, that's correct. We'll be looking at, we did cancel the most recently scheduled landfill advisory committee. We will have to have some discussion on what we're going to do with our waste management programs, given that this report will not likely be finalized until the spring of 2021. And we have contracts that come due at the end of the month of November in 2020. So perhaps options to extend those contracts until we have that full report done might be appropriate. But again, that'll be something that'll come back to council and with discussions with the landfill advisory committee as well.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Deputy Mayor Warden.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yohan, I would like to see us try and get those contracts extended at this moment. Be proactive and say, due to the current COVID, we're not going to be able to do our landfill stuff in a time. Would you consider extending your contract by like 6 months or even a year? Because I honestly think that there's going to be a big discussion on this file. I'm sure Councillor Jaworski, being on that committee, will have a lot to say, but I'd like to see us go at them now and just kind of use this as an opportunity to say, maybe we'll catch them and they'll be able to extend at the current rates, which we've been lucky so far. And hopefully they'll agree to extend by 1 year, and then that'll buy us time. Thoughts on other members?
Thank you. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Just like I brought up at the last council meeting, when I put forward my motion about reviewing waste management, I was looking at something that is more like a much wider scope than what Phil Committee can do in terms of, is this something that we should, really change the organization of? Is it something we should, like if we talk waste management, which will likely will not, should we do the pickup in-house? Should we continue with the third party? Should we look at some sort of in-between hybrid method, something to really look at how, if we can be more efficient or more cost effective? So to me, that's, that's beyond the scope of what's, being recorded in the unfinished business description. It's like, doing more study on what the landfill committee can do. And perhaps that's something that, we will need more time, to Deputy Mayor Warden's point, that perhaps we need to look at extensions now. But in terms of doing that proper, you know, like study that I asked for, we need to start on that soon as well.
Yeah, that's I believe that study is the one that we're working at regionally with SDG. So I believe that is fairly comprehensive and would cover the items you're speaking of. But you know, perhaps that's an item for further discussion as well.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move to community services. Number 12 is Hamlet signage policy. Mrs. Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we received draft templates from the sign designer, and we've asked her to add in the signage for the United Counties as per their request to represent their slogan. So we are expecting revised templates to come to us very soon. And as soon as we have them and we're satisfied with them, we'll bring the policy to council.
Okay, thank you. And the floodplain mapping project?
I am happy to report that I've achieved all the requirements as per the March 31st deadline. It took a little bit of effort, but all good. In moving forward, we're going to have different components that will have to be completed to be able to be ready to explain to council what it means, as well as to explain to the public. And then we're hoping to turn this into a land use planning document that will be included in the official plan once we've dealt with all the appeals. But I have no concerns with us not receiving the funding because we have achieved the requirements of the grant.
That's great to hear. Just wanted to recognize we had 3 members of council applauding you and 1 had their thumbs up. So thank you for
congratulations. Thank you. Let's wait till the money comes into the bank and then we'll know for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Councillor McDonnell, are you waving at me or do you have a question?
I just wanted to make a comment that to thank Joanne on completing that deadline. One thing that council might not realize as well is she was also completing a deadline in conjunction with Ms. Bingley in regards to applying for more funding through the provincial government in Enbridge. So it was a very hectic time for her, and I know she was very stressed and was working a lot of hours. We spent a lot of time on the phone. And I'd like to thank her for her commitment to both projects because both are highly essential projects in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McDonnell. We'll pass that on to Ms. Bingley as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move to corporate services. I guess 12 and 14, Mr. McDonald.
Yes, it's actually May 18th. I have it as May 17th in the agenda. May 17th is Casey's birthday, so it's the Monday following that. But both will be done at that point. You'll have your letter with the bill with a chart explaining where the money is from, and if that doesn't work, then we'll carry on from there. But look forward to that May 18th. It's going to be water friendly.
Okay, great, water friendly. We'll be anxious to see it also. And 15 strategic plan action plans.
I believe that's Tim Mills.
Tim, yep.
Yeah.
Well, as many of you are aware, excuse me, are aware, things changed drastically in the last 4 weeks with some things. So what we have, what I'm going to propose here is that we wait to see where what the ministry decides to do April 13th with the extension of the emergency order. We do have departmental plans in place for each department based on what's happening right now for continuity. And as was said earlier by Councillor Jaworski, that the staff has really stepped up in all areas to ensure that the delivery continues. But I would ask that I can update you at the next, I'll update you at the next council meeting where we're at, because I wouldn't want to bring a report forward to promise you this is going to be done quarterly in the next 6 months or the next 12 months when we simply don't know where we're going to be. So if that's okay.
Yep, no, that's understandable under the circumstances for sure. Thank you. And civic signage project.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the civic side signage project, The bylaws in final review, quite honestly, we've postponed it due to the last few weeks, but it will be on the April 20th council meeting for your final review. The details are, it's in essence 99% complete, ready to go. So though implementing the program, we'll have to, the operations of it, as far as having people come into the office, pick up other added signage, we're going to have to contemplate how we move forward with that, whether we delay the program or whether we come up with a novel approach to get the signage into people's hands. But the first step will be to run the civic addressing bylaw by yourselves. So, and that'll be April the 20th. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. And again, under the circumstances, we have no issue with April 20th. So if there's nothing further, I have a motion moved by Sam McInerney, second by Martin Lang. Be resolved that bylaw number 21-2020 to adopt, confirm, and ratify matters dealt with by resolution be read a first, second, third time, passed, signed, and sealed in open council. You heard the motion. All in favor of the motion? I can only see two of them. Okay, motion's carried. Thank you. And if there's nothing further, I have a motion moved by Lyle Warden, second by Stephanie Dworsky. Be resolved that the Council of the Township of South Glengarry adjourn to the call of the chair at 9:27 p.m. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. I think the system worked out fine. So I think it'll just get easier as time goes on, but hopefully we don't have to do this for months and months ahead. But thanks very much for joining us tonight.